My daughter called me with false emergencies for 5 years to drain my life savings, creating fake accidents, forged medical bills, and fabricated legal troubles to steal over $200,000 from me. The day I discovered the truth about her elaborate web of lies will haunt me forever. Before we dive into this shocking story, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from today. My name is Patricia, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew my daughter better than anyone else in the world. I'd raised Emma as a single mother after her father walked out when she was just 3 years old, working double shifts as a nurse to provide for us both. We'd been through everything together, thick and thin, and I believed we had an unbreakable bond built on love, trust, and mutual respect. I was wrong about everything. It all started innocently enough 5 years ago when Emma was 28 and supposedly getting her life together after a difficult divorce. She'd moved to Portland for a fresh start, landing what she described as a great job at a marketing firm. I was so proud of her for picking herself up and moving forward after the painful end of her marriage to her high school sweetheart, Michael. The first emergency call came on a rainy Thursday evening in October. I was just settling down with a cup of tea and my favorite mystery novel when my phone rang with Emma's ringtone. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was terribly wrong. She was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. "Mom, I need your help," she sobbed into the phone. "I've been in a car accident and I'm at the hospital right now. They're saying I need surgery on my shoulder, but my insurance isn't covering everything. I don't know what to do." My heart immediately jumped into my throat. My baby girl was hurt and scared, alone in a hospital 300 miles away from me. Without hesitation, I asked her how much money she needed. She said the hospital required a $5,000 deposit before they could proceed with the surgery, and she didn't have anywhere near that amount in her account. "Don't worry about a thing, sweetheart," I told her, already reaching for my purse to find my checkbook. "I'll wire you the money first thing in the morning. Are you going to be okay until then?" Emma assured me that the hospital would wait for the payment, and she'd call me after the surgery to let me know how everything went. I spent the entire night awake, worried sick about my daughter and praying that her surgery would go smoothly. The next morning, I was at the bank the moment they opened, wiring $5,000 to Emma's account. She called me that evening to tell me the surgery had gone perfectly and that she was recovering well. She sounded tired but grateful, thanking me over and over for helping her in her time of need. I told her that's what mothers are for, and that she never needed to thank me for taking care of her. Over the next few weeks, Emma seemed to be recovering well from her accident. She'd call every few days to update me on her physical therapy progress and to chat about her job and her new life in Portland. Everything seemed to be getting back to normal, and I was relieved that the worst was behind us. The second emergency call came about 4 months later in February. This time, Emma was calling from what sounded like a police station, her voice shaking with fear and anxiety. She explained that she'd been arrested for a DUI after leaving a work happy hour, even though she insisted she'd only had 1 glass of wine with dinner. "Mom, I'm so scared," she whispered into the phone. "They're saying I could lose my job if this goes on my record. I need to hire a lawyer, but good ones are expensive. The one I talked to says he needs a $10,000 retainer, but he's confident he can get the charges reduced or dismissed entirely." Once again, my maternal instincts kicked in immediately. The thought of my daughter losing her job and having a criminal record was unthinkable. Emma had worked so hard to rebuild her life after her divorce, and one mistake shouldn't ruin everything she'd accomplished. I didn't hesitate to wire her the money for the lawyer. The legal case dragged on for several months, with Emma calling regularly to update me on court dates and legal proceedings. Eventually, she called to tell me that her lawyer had successfully gotten the charges dismissed due to procedural errors in how the police had conducted the arrest. I was relieved and proud that we'd made the right decision to hire a good attorney. But the emergencies didn't stop there. Over the next 4 years, they seemed to come with disturbing regularity, each one more serious and expensive than the last. There was the time Emma needed emergency dental work after supposedly falling down the stairs at her apartment building, requiring $15,000 for multiple implants and reconstructive work. Then there was the incident where she claimed her laptop had been stolen from her car along with important work files, necessitating not only a new computer but also payment to a data recovery specialist to recreate her lost projects. The medical emergencies were the most frequent and the most expensive. Emma seemed to have an unusual run of bad luck with her health, requiring everything from emergency appendix surgery to treatment for a severe allergic reaction that landed her in the intensive care unit for a week. Each time, there were complications with her insurance coverage, leaving her with substantial out-of-pocket expenses that she couldn't afford on her salary. I never questioned any of these emergencies because they all seemed plausible, and Emma always provided what appeared to be supporting documentation. She'd send me photos of hospital bills, legal documents, and insurance claim forms that looked completely legitimate. More importantly, she always sounded genuinely distressed and grateful when she called for help, never demanding or entitled. As a mother, my instinct was always to protect and help my child, regardless of the cost. I'd worked hard my entire life and had managed to save a substantial amount for my retirement, so I felt fortunate to be in a position to help Emma when she needed it most. What kind of mother would I be if I let my daughter suffer when I had the means to help her? Looking back now, I can see there were warning signs that I should have paid attention to, but at the time they seemed like minor inconsistencies rather than red flags. For instance, Emma never seemed to have any lasting effects from her various medical procedures. She'd call in a panic about needing emergency surgery, but a few weeks later she'd be talking about going hiking or participating in marathon training. There was also the fact that Emma never seemed to learn from her experiences or take steps to prevent future emergencies. After the car accident, she didn't mention getting safer car or taking a defensive driving course. After the DUI, she didn't talk about limiting her alcohol consumption or using ride-sharing services. After the dental emergency, she didn't mention being more careful on stairs or improving the lighting in her apartment building. But the biggest red flag, which I'm ashamed to admit I ignored for far too long, was that Emma never invited me to visit her in Portland, and she never came home to visit me. For 5 years, our relationship existed entirely over the phone and through text messages. She always had reasonable explanations for why visits weren't possible. She was too busy with work, she was recovering from an injury, she was dealing with legal issues, or she was saving money to pay me back. The few times I suggested flying out to Portland to see her, especially when she was supposedly recovering from surgery, Emma would become anxious and find reasons why it wasn't a good time. She'd say the doctors had advised her to avoid having visitors while she was healing, or that her apartment was too small and messy for company, or that she didn't want me to see her in such a vulnerable state. I rationalized all of these excuses because I wanted to respect Emma's independence and autonomy as an adult. She was almost 35 years old, and I didn't want to be an overbearing mother who showed up uninvited when her daughter was going through difficult times. I thought I was being supportive by giving her space while still providing financial help when she needed it. The truth began to unravel completely by accident on a sunny Saturday morning in late spring. I was doing some spring cleaning in my home office when I came across a box of old financial records that I'd been meaning to organize. As I sorted through bank statements and tax documents, I decided to add up exactly how much money I'd sent to Emma over the past 5 years. I'd never kept a running total because each emergency had seemed like an isolated incident, and I'd always assumed Emma would eventually pay me back when she got back on her feet financially. But as I went through my records and added up wire transfers, checks, and electronic payments, the total amount was staggering. I'd sent Emma over $200,000. $200,000. That was more than half of my entire retirement savings accumulated over decades of careful budgeting and investing. The number hit me like a physical blow, leaving me sitting in my office chair in stunned silence for what felt like hours. Even more disturbing was the pattern I could see when I laid out all the transactions chronologically. The amounts had steadily increased over time, starting with the $5,000 hospital deposit and eventually reaching requests for $25,000 and $30,000 for major medical procedures. The frequency had also increased, with months between the early emergencies but sometimes only weeks between the more recent ones. I tried to rationalize the pattern by telling myself that Emma had simply had an unusual run of bad luck and that medical costs had increased dramatically over the years. But deep down, a nagging voice in my head was starting to whisper that something wasn't right about the whole situation. That nagging voice became impossible to ignore when I decided to do something I'd never done before. I started researching some of Emma's claimed emergencies online. I began with the legal issues, since those would be matters of public record that I could potentially verify independently. I spent hours searching court records and legal databases for any mention of Emma's name in connection with the DUI case she described. I searched by her full name, her maiden name, and even variations of her name, but I couldn't find any record of her ever being arrested or charged with driving under the influence in Portland or anywhere else in Oregon. Confused and increasingly worried, I decided to search for records of the car accident that had started this whole saga 5 years earlier. Surely a serious accident requiring surgery would have resulted in police reports, insurance claims, or other documentation that would be accessible through public records searches. But once again, I found nothing. No accident reports, no insurance claims, no hospital records that I could access legally. It was as if these events that had been so central to Emma's life and to my financial support of her had never actually happened. The possibility that Emma had been lying to me was so devastating that I couldn't fully accept it at first. I told myself that maybe the records were sealed for privacy reasons, or that I wasn't searching in the right databases, or that there were perfectly innocent explanations for why I couldn't find any documentation. But I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. I started researching the medical facilities Emma had claimed to receive treatment from, the law firms she'd supposedly hired, and even the apartment building where she'd claimed to have her dental accident. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Several of the medical facilities Emma had mentioned didn't exist at all. Others existed but had no record of ever treating a patient with Emma's name. The law firm that had supposedly represented her in the DUI case had never heard of her and confirmed they'd never handled a case matching her description. Most damning of all, when I finally worked up the courage to call the apartment complex where Emma claimed to live, the property manager told me that no one by Emma's name had ever been a tenant there. In fact, the building didn't even have the kind of staircase Emma had described falling down when she supposedly needed emergency dental work. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Emma had been systematically lying to me for 5 years, creating elaborate fictional emergencies to extract money from me. Every panicked phone call, every tearful conversation, every expression of gratitude had been part of an elaborate performance designed to manipulate my maternal instincts and drain my life savings. But even with all this evidence, I still struggled to accept the full scope of Emma's deception. The Emma I thought I knew was incapable of such calculated cruelty. She was my little girl, the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for, the child I'd raised to be honest and kind and compassionate. How could she systematically lie to me and steal from me for years without showing any signs of guilt or remorse? I spent several sleepless nights trying to make sense of what I'd discovered, wondering if I was somehow misunderstanding the situation or if there was still an innocent explanation for the inconsistencies. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that all the pieces fit together perfectly once I accepted that Emma had been deliberately deceiving me. The decision about what to do next was agonizing. Part of me wanted to confront Emma immediately and demand an explanation for her lies. Another part of me wanted to involve law enforcement since what Emma had done was clearly fraud. But a larger part of me just wanted to understand why my own daughter would do something so horrible to me. I decided that before taking any action, I needed to know where Emma really was and what she was really doing with her life. If she wasn't living in Portland and working at a marketing firm, where was she? And what was she doing with the hundreds of thousands of dollars she'd stolen from me? This is where the investigation became both easier and more heartbreaking. With modern technology and social media, it's surprisingly difficult for someone to completely disappear, especially if they're not expecting anyone to be looking for them. Within a few days of dedicated searching, I'd found clear evidence of where Emma was really living and what she was really doing. Emma was living in Las Vegas, Nevada, not Portland, Oregon. And instead of working at a marketing firm and struggling to pay her bills, she was living in a luxury apartment and spending her days gambling at high-end casinos. Her social media accounts, which she'd apparently forgot to make private, were full of photos of expensive meals, designer clothes, luxury vacations, and nights out at exclusive clubs and shows. The photos told the story of someone living far beyond any reasonable means, someone with access to large amounts of disposable income. There were pictures of Emma wearing jewelry that must have cost thousands of dollars, sitting in first-class airplane seats on trips to exotic destinations, and posing in designer outfits at expensive restaurants and events. But the most devastating discovery was a photo Emma had posted just 2 weeks earlier, showing her celebrating at a poker table with a large pile of chips in front of her. The caption read, "Another lucky night. Sometimes it pays to take risks." The timestamp showed that she'd posted this photo just 3 days after calling me in tears about needing money for emergency medical treatment. The betrayal was so complete and so calculated that I could barely process it emotionally. For 5 years, while I'd been worrying about Emma's health, her safety, and her financial stability, she'd been living a life of luxury funded entirely by my retirement savings. Every emergency had been fiction, every crisis had been performance, every expression of gratitude had been manipulation. But even more devastating than the financial loss was the realization that the daughter I thought I knew didn't actually exist. The Emma who called me crying about medical emergencies was a character she'd created to manipulate me. The real Emma was someone who could look at photos of herself living in luxury, while knowing that her mother was sacrificing her retirement security to support what she believed were desperate needs. I spent days in a state of shock, barely eating or sleeping as I tried to process the full scope of Emma's betrayal. I kept thinking about all the nights I'd lain awake worrying about her, all the times I'd felt proud of how well she was handling her various crises, all the moments when I'd felt grateful that I was in a position to help my daughter when she needed me most. All of it had been lies. Every single conversation, every emergency, every expression of need or gratitude had been carefully calculated to extract as much money from me as possible while maintaining the illusion that Emma was a struggling but responsible adult who just needed temporary help to get through difficult times. The question of what to do next was incredibly complex and emotionally fraught. On one hand, Emma had clearly committed serious crimes, fraud, theft, and probably several other charges that could result in significant prison time. As a law-abiding citizen, I felt obligated to report these crimes to the authorities. But on the other hand, Emma was still my daughter, and I couldn't escape the fact that pursuing criminal charges would likely result in her going to prison for years. Despite everything she'd done to me, the thought of my child behind bars was almost unbearable. I also had to consider the practical implications of involving law enforcement. Even if Emma was convicted and ordered to pay restitution, the chances of me recovering any significant portion of the stolen money were probably slim. Emma had clearly been spending the money as fast as she was stealing it, living an unsustainable lifestyle that would collapse the moment her source of funding dried up. After much agonizing deliberation, I decided that I needed to confront Emma directly before making any decisions about involving law enforcement. I needed to hear her explanation, to understand her motivations, and to give her a chance to make things right voluntarily. Part of me still hoped that there was some explanation I hadn't considered, some circumstance that might justify or explain her behavior. I planned the confrontation carefully, knowing that Emma would likely try to create another fictional emergency if she suspected I was onto her. I decided to call her and pretend that I wanted to visit her in Portland, claiming that I had some business in the area and thought it would be nice to finally see her new life in person. Emma's reaction to my suggestion was immediate and telling. She became flustered and started creating obstacles immediately, claiming that her apartment was being fumigated, that she was traveling for work, that she wasn't feeling well enough for visitors. When I pressed the issue and said I could wait until the fumigation was finished, she became increasingly agitated and eventually said she'd have to call me back. Instead of waiting for her to call back, I decided to force the issue. I booked a flight to Las Vegas and sent Emma a text message saying that I knew where she really was and that we needed to talk immediately. I told her I'd be arriving at her apartment the next evening and that she could either be there to talk to me voluntarily or I'd involve the police and let them handle the situation. The flight to Las Vegas was one of the longest and most emotionally difficult experiences of my life. I kept oscillating between anger at Emma's betrayal and heartbreak over the loss of the relationship I thought we'd had. I'd raised Emma to be honest and compassionate, and I couldn't understand how she'd turned into someone capable of such systematic deception and cruelty. When I arrived at Emma's apartment building, I was struck by how expensive and luxurious it was. The building had a doorman, a valet parking service, and amenities that would cost thousands of dollars per month. This was not the modest living situation of someone struggling to pay medical bills and legal fees. Emma answered her door looking exactly like someone who'd been caught in an elaborate lie. She was pale, shaking, and clearly had been crying. For a moment, seeing her in that vulnerable state, my maternal instincts kicked in and I wanted to comfort her. But then I remembered the 5 years of systematic lies and the hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen retirement savings. "Mom, I can explain everything," Emma said before I'd even stepped into her apartment. But as I looked around at the expensive furniture, the designer clothes hanging in her closet, and the collection of high-end electronics and jewelry, I realized that no explanation could possibly justify what she'd done. The conversation that followed was devastating for both of us. Emma initially tried to maintain some of her lies, claiming that she really had been in accidents and needed medical treatment, but that she'd moved to Las Vegas for a new job opportunity. When I confronted her with the evidence I'd gathered, including the fact that none of the medical facilities or legal firms she'd mentioned had any record of her, she finally broke down and admitted the truth. Emma confessed that the entire 5-year saga had been an elaborate fraud designed to fund her gambling addiction and luxury lifestyle. She'd started with small lies and escalating amounts because she discovered that I would send money immediately whenever she claimed to be in a medical emergency. What had begun as a few $1,000s to cover gambling debts had evolved into a systematic scheme to extract as much money as possible. The most heartbreaking part of her confession was her admission that she'd never intended to pay me back and had never felt guilty about lying to me. In her mind, I was wealthy enough to afford the money, and she deserved to live the lifestyle she wanted regardless of how she had to get it. She'd rationalized her behavior by telling herself that I would never miss the money and that she was entitled to it as my daughter. When I asked her about all the times she'd sounded genuinely distressed and grateful during our phone calls, Emma shrugged and said she'd always been good at acting. She'd studied my reactions and learned exactly what to say to trigger my maternal instincts and open my wallet. Every sob, every expression of gratitude, every promise to pay me back had been carefully calculated manipulation. The Emma sitting across from me in that expensive apartment was a stranger. She bore no resemblance to the daughter I thought I'd raised or the person I'd been supporting for 5 years. She was cold, calculating, and completely without remorse for the pain and financial damage she'd caused me. When I asked her what she planned to do now that her scheme had been exposed, Emma said she expected me to continue supporting her because I was her mother and that's what mothers do. She seemed genuinely surprised when I told her that our relationship was over and that I'd be reporting her crimes to the police. The legal proceedings that followed were complex and emotionally draining. Emma was ultimately charged with multiple counts of fraud and theft, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. Her confession, combined with the documentation I'd gathered and the clear trail of financial transactions, made it impossible for her to claim innocence. Emma eventually accepted a plea deal that included prison time, probation, and an order to pay restitution. However, since she'd spent virtually all of the stolen money on gambling and luxury living, the chances of recovering any significant amount were minimal. The court ordered her to pay me back, but the reality is that someone with a gambling addiction and no legitimate income is unlikely to be able to repay hundreds of thousands of dollars. The emotional aftermath of Emma's betrayal was far more difficult to deal with than the financial loss. I'd not only lost most of my retirement savings, but I'd also lost my daughter and my faith in my ability to judge people's character. If my own child could deceive me so completely for so long, how could I trust anyone else? I went through months of therapy to process the trauma of Emma's betrayal and to develop strategies for rebuilding my life after such a devastating loss. My therapist helped me understand that Emma's behavior was not a reflection of my failures as a mother, but rather the result of psychological issues and character defects that I couldn't have prevented or predicted. The financial recovery process was also challenging. At 68 years old, I had to completely restructure my retirement plans and return to work part-time to rebuild some of my savings. The lifestyle I'd planned for my golden years was no longer possible, and I had to accept a much more modest standard of living. Perhaps most difficult was learning to trust again and form new relationships. Emma's betrayal had damaged my ability to believe people's words and trust their motivations. I found myself questioning everyone's honesty and constantly looking for signs of deception or manipulation in my interactions with others. But slowly, with the help of therapy and the support of genuine friends, I began to rebuild my life and my sense of trust. I learned to differentiate between healthy caution and paranoid suspicion, and I developed better boundaries in my relationships with others. I also became involved in educating other parents and seniors about the warning signs of financial manipulation by family members. Emma's scheme was unfortunately not unique. There are many cases of adult children systematically stealing from their parents through elaborate lies and emotional manipulation. The key warning signs I learned to watch for include requests for money that come with urgent deadlines, claims of emergencies that conveniently happen when banks are closed or when documentation isn't immediately available, reluctance to provide detailed information about supposed crises, and patterns of escalating amounts or frequency of requests. Most importantly, I learned that genuine love and support don't require blind trust or unlimited financial assistance. Healthy adult relationships, even between parents and children, include boundaries, accountability, and mutual respect. Emma's expectation that I should continue supporting her regardless of her lies and theft was not evidence of a loving relationship. but rather proof of her sense of entitlement and lack of genuine care for my well-being. Today, more than 2 years after discovering Emma's deception, I've managed to rebuild much of my financial stability and emotional equilibrium. I still grieve for the relationship I thought I had with my daughter, and I probably always will. But I've also found peace in knowing that I did everything I could to be a loving and supportive mother, and that Emma's choices were her own responsibility. Emma completed her prison sentence about 6 months ago, but she hasn't attempted to contact me since her release. I don't know where she's living or what she's doing with her life, and I've made the difficult decision that I don't want to know. Some relationships are too damaged by betrayal and abuse to be repaired, even when they involve family members. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of verifying claims independently, maintaining healthy boundaries in relationships, and recognizing that love doesn't require sacrificing one's own financial security or emotional well-being. I also learned that it's possible to survive even the most devastating betrayals and rebuild a meaningful life afterward. While I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, I'm grateful for the strength and wisdom it ultimately brought me. I now have much healthier relationships with the people in my life, and I'm better able to distinguish between genuine need and manipulative behavior. Most importantly, I've learned that my worth as a person and as a mother isn't determined by how much money I'm willing to give to others, but rather by how well I take care of myself and maintain my own integrity. If you found this story compelling and want to hear more true stories about family betrayal and financial manipulation, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts about Emma's deception in the comments below and let us know if you've experienced similar situations with family members. For another shocking family story, check out the video suggestion that should be appearing on your screen right now.